In 1940, Adamski and a few of his closest students, wishing to separate themselves from the travails of the world and devote themselves to philosophy, moved to a ranch near Mount Palomar, California. There they farmed and studied. 4 years later, the group bought a 20-acre property on the mountain itself, with funds provided by Miss Alice Wells, one of the students. They cleared the land, built simple dwellings, and dubbed their new retreat at Palomar Gardens. They also built a restaurant, which became a gathering place for the group, called the Palomar Gardens Café, and run by Miss Wells. It catered to both tourists on the mountain and visitors to the retreat. Adamski served as a handyman, and all-around helper, but in the evenings he gave informal talks in the dining room. At the top of the mountain, was the Hale Observatory. In his opening remarks, saying flying saucers have landed, Adamski would seek to dispel the confusion that had resulted from his sharing an address with the observatory. He had acquired by now a larger telescope, a 15-inch reflector. When night came to the mountain, he would head over to the dome in which the telescope was housed, to scan the heavens and ponder their mysteries. One night in 1947, he watched, as a series of lights moved across the sky. When one of them stopped abruptly and reversed its course, he said to himself, "This must be what they call a flying saucer." It was a notion that Adamski was able to accept. His years of studying and teaching philosophy, he explains, had convinced him that beings similar to man must inhabit countless planets of the universe, and that some of them would have developed the means of interplanetary travel. Adamski began to scan the sky in earnest, looking for spacecrafts. And it was not long before he had spotted and photographed a number of them. The local Rotary Club heard about the photos, and invited him to give a talk on his sightings. A seasoned lecturer, Adamski was pleased to comply. The talk was well received by the Rotarians, and was given newspaper coverage. Adamski applied himself now to obtaining more detailed photos of the spacecraft. In all kinds of weather, he scanned the sky through his telescope. And he began to entertain a hope that one of the ships would land. That its occupants would emerge and speak with him, and maybe even give him a ride. For the observations and photography that had become his obsession, Palomar Gardens was the perfect site. Its 3,000-foot elevation afforded a clear view in every direction. The view was inspiring. You can see the mountains, the sea and San Diego City in the distant. Night after night the philosopher spent with his telescope, often napping beside it in a hammock. In winter months the stars shone with an icy brilliance, and as the wind roared, not even the hot coffee that his wife, or a female follower, brought out to him could allay the cold. But on spring and summer nights the breeze whispered through the trees, owls hooted, coyotes yapped at the moon. These were nights of magic to recompense for those of discomfort as I continued my watch for the mysterious saucers. The saucers were increasingly visible, they were moving in closer to the Earth, he believed. And in 1952, Adamski had obtained a large quantity of photos, some of which showed well-outlined forms, but not much detail. Many of the craft he sighted were in the vicinity of the Moon. Word of the photos spread, and Adamski, an unpolished yet oddly compelling public speaker, became in demand in Southern California as a lecturer. In his talks he displayed blow-ups of his best photos, proof of the reality of flying saucers, photographic evidence. He also published an article in Fate magazine. Titled "I Photographed Spaceships," it created a stir and brought in requests for copies of the photos, which Adamski supplied for $1 each. As he became a figure of note in UFO circles, enthusiasts began to appear on his doorstep, often having driven a great distance to meet him. Adamski knew, of course, that the response to the photos was mixed. Many people were scoffing and accusing him of fakery. But his lectures, however received, were serving a purpose, he insisted. They were causing people to take an interest in flying saucers, and to keep an eye out for the mysterious craft. On the afternoon of November 20, 1952, he tells us flying saucers have landed. Adamski had his first encounter face-to-face contact with a man from space. During the previous year he had journeyed on several occasions into the Mojave Desert to areas where saucers were said to be landing. Nothing had come of those excursions. On this day he was trying again. Accompanying him were Alice Wells, his secretary Lucy McGinnis, and 4 UFO enthusiasts, including Alfred Bailey and George Hunt Williamson. They drove about in the desert watching the sky and following Adamski's hunches as to a possible landing site. Finally, he ordered that they stop and get out of the car. They roamed on foot in the rocky desert terrain. Mountains loomed about them, deceptively close. A strong wind was blowing, and the women tied scarves around their heads. After a half-hour the party returned to the car for a picnic lunch. But the saucer watch continued as they scanned the sky and ate. Suddenly, everyone turned to look over a ridge and gaped. As Adamski describes it, flying saucers have landed. Riding high, and without sound, there was a huge cigar-shaped silvery ship, without wings or appendages of any kind. Slowly, almost as if it was drifting, it came in our direction, then seemed to stop, hovering motionless. Like a long, narrow cloud, the object hung there in the sky. Voices trembling with excitement, they debated the identity of the object. George Hunt Williamson was sure it was a spaceship. Lucy McGinnis deemed it an airplane, but unable to discern any wings, she suddenly changed her mind. Yes, it's a spaceship. They stared in amazement at the long narrow craft, but not a flying saucer, but a mother ship. It began to move off.